2 weeks had passed since the medical appointment, and the atmosphere at Buckingham Palace had shifted dramatically. James could feel the tension in every corner of the building, from the worried whispers of senior staff to the increased security measures that had been quietly implemented. The changes were subtle but significant. King Charles's public schedule had been gradually reduced, with several events postponed or canceled due to what were described as scheduling conflicts. More concerning to James was the king's physical appearance during the few public engagements he did attend. The monarch seemed to tire more easily, and there were moments when his usual sharp focus appeared to waver. On a gray Monday morning in early January, James was summoned to an unusual meeting. Instead of receiving his daily briefing from the head of security, he was asked to report directly to the king's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton. This was highly irregular. James had only spoken to Sir Clive a handful of times in his 15 years of service. The meeting took place in a small office tucked away in the administrative wing of the palace. Sir Clive was waiting for him, along with two other individuals James recognized as senior members of the royal household staff. The serious expressions on their faces told James that this was not a routine briefing. "James," Sir Clive began, "please sit down. We need to discuss a matter of extreme sensitivity." James took the offered chair, his mind racing through possibilities. Had someone discovered what he had overheard? Was he being reassigned? The formal tone of the meeting suggested something significant was about to happen. "As you know," Sir Clive continued, "there have been some changes to His Majesty's schedule recently. What you may not be aware of is that these changes are related to a personal health matter that requires careful management." James nodded, maintaining his professional composure while his heart rate increased. This was the moment he had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. "We have reason to believe that you may have become aware of certain sensitive information during the course of your duties," Sir Clive said, his eyes studying James's face carefully. "Information that, if it were to become public, could have serious consequences for the monarchy and the nation." James met his gaze steadily. "I understand the importance of discretion in my role, sir. Always have." "Yes," Sir Clive replied, "which is why you're here today. His Majesty has specifically requested that you be brought into a very small circle of trusted individuals who will be helping to manage this situation over the coming months." The weight of these words settled heavily on James's shoulders. He was being officially brought into the king's inner circle, a position that carried both honor and enormous responsibility. "What exactly does that involve?" James asked. One of the other staff members, whom James recognized as the Queen's private secretary, leaned forward. "It means that your role is expanding beyond traditional security duties," she said. "You may be asked to accompany their Majesties to medical appointments, to help maintain privacy during sensitive moments, and to act as a trusted intermediary when regular protocols need to be adjusted." Sir Clive nodded in agreement. "The king's condition is progressive," he said bluntly. "There will be good days and more challenging days. During the more challenging periods, we need people we can trust implicitly to help maintain the dignity and privacy that their Majesties deserve." James felt the full impact of what was being asked of him. He wasn't just being trusted with a secret anymore. He was being asked to actively participate in managing one of the most significant royal health crises in modern history. "I'm honored by their trust," James said carefully. "But I want to make sure I understand what's expected of me." "Complete discretion, obviously," Sir Clive replied. "But beyond that, we need you to use your judgment in situations that may not have clear protocols. There may be times when protecting their Majesty's privacy takes precedence over standard procedures." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, during which James was briefed on various scenarios he might encounter and given contact information for the small team of medical professionals who were managing the king's care. By the time it ended, James understood that his life at the palace was about to change dramatically. Later that afternoon, James was called to escort King Charles to another private medical appointment. This time, the destination was the king's own residence at Clarence House, where a team of specialists had been assembled for a comprehensive evaluation. During the journey, King Charles was unusually talkative, perhaps needing to fill the silence with conversation to manage his anxiety about the appointment. He asked James about his family, his background, and his plans for the future. It felt more like a conversation between friends than between a monarch and his security detail. "James," the king said as they neared Clarence House, "I want you to know that I didn't ask for you to be brought into this situation lightly. Your discretion and loyalty over the years haven't gone unnoticed." "Thank you, Your Majesty," James replied. "I'm here for whatever you need." The king was quiet for a moment before continuing. "The thing about facing something like this," he said, "is that you realize how important it is to have people around you who you can trust completely. People who see you as a human being first and a monarch second." James was struck by the vulnerability in the king's voice. This was a man who had spent his entire life in the public eye, performing his role with dignity and composure, now facing the possibility that his ability to continue that performance might be compromised. The medical appointment at Clarence House lasted for over 3 hours. James waited in the main corridor, positioned to ensure privacy while remaining available if needed. During this time, he observed the steady stream of medical professionals moving in and out of the consultation room, their serious expressions suggesting that this was more than a routine checkup. About halfway through the appointment, Queen Camilla arrived, looking more worried than James had ever seen her. She paused when she saw him, offering a wan smile before disappearing into the consultation room. When the appointment finally concluded, both King Charles and Queen Camilla emerged looking emotionally drained. The medical team followed, engaging in hushed conversations with the royal couple about treatment schedules and monitoring protocols. As they prepared to return to Buckingham Palace, one of the doctors approached James directly. "You're part of His Majesty's security detail?" the doctor asked. "Yes, sir," James replied. The doctor handed him a small card. "This has my direct contact information. If you notice any sudden changes in His Majesty's condition during your duties, confusion, difficulty speaking, loss of balance, call this number immediately." The gravity of the situation hit James like a physical blow. He was being given medical emergency protocols, which meant the king's condition could potentially lead to sudden, serious episodes. During the return journey to the palace, King Charles and Queen Camilla sat in contemplative silence. James could see in the rearview mirror that they were holding hands, drawing strength from each other in the face of whatever news they had received. As they approached the palace gates, King Charles suddenly spoke. "James, I need to ask something of you that goes beyond your normal duties." "Of course, Your Majesty." "In the coming weeks, there may be times when I'm not myself," the king said carefully. "Times when the medication or the condition itself affects my judgment or behavior. If that happens, I need you to help protect not just my physical safety, but my dignity as well." James felt the enormous weight of responsibility settling on him. "I understand, sir. I hope you do," the king replied quietly. "Because what I'm really asking is for you to help me remain king for as long as possible, even when my body and mind may be working against me." That evening, after completing his regular duties, James found himself walking through the palace gardens, trying to process everything that had happened. The conversation with King Charles had revealed the true scope of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about managing a medical condition. It was about preserving the monarchy itself during a period of unprecedented challenge. The next morning brought new developments. James arrived at the palace to find that several changes had been implemented overnight. Additional security personnel had been brought in, all carefully vetted for their discretion. The king's schedule had been restructured to allow for more private time, and new protocols had been established for managing medical emergencies. Sir Clive Alderton called James into his office again, this time to provide more detailed briefings about the king's condition and what to expect in the coming months. The conversation was clinical and thorough, covering everything from medication side effects to the progression of symptoms. "The most challenging aspect," Sir Clive explained, "will be maintaining the public perception of stability while managing the private reality of the king's declining health. This will require careful coordination between medical staff, security personnel, and senior household members." James learned that a comprehensive plan had been developed to handle various scenarios, from minor episodes that could be managed privately to more serious situations that might require temporary withdrawal from public duties. His role in each scenario was clearly defined, giving him the framework he needed to act decisively when necessary. Over the following days, James observed subtle changes in the palace routine that reflected the new reality. The king's morning meetings were scheduled later to accommodate his need for additional rest. Medical equipment had been discreetly installed in various locations throughout the palace. Most importantly, a small team of trusted staff members had been assigned to work closely with the royal family during this difficult time. The transformation of James's role from security guard to confidential aide and protector was complete. He now attended medical appointments, participated in planning meetings, and served as a bridge between the royal family and the various specialists managing the king's care. One evening, as James was preparing to end his shift, Queen Camilla approached him in the corridor outside the king's private study. Her expression was one of gratitude mixed with exhaustion. "James," she said, "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done these past few weeks. Having someone we can trust completely has made this unbearable situation just a little more bearable." "I'm honored to help in any way I can, Your Majesty," James replied. "You've become more than just our protector," she continued. "You've become our ally in preserving not just Charles's dignity, but the dignity of the institution he represents. That means more to us than you can possibly know." As James left the palace that evening, he reflected on how completely his life had changed. He was no longer just witnessing royal history. He was actively participating in shaping it. The secret he carried was enormous, but so was the trust that had been placed in him. The coming months would test every aspect of his loyalty, discretion, and judgment. King Charles's health would continue to decline, requiring increasingly sophisticated management to maintain the public facade of royal stability. James knew that his role would only become more crucial as the situation evolved. But, for now, he was content in the knowledge that he was helping a good man face an impossible situation with dignity and grace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, James was committed to ensuring that King Charles could continue to serve his nation for as long as possible, protected by the loyalty and discretion of those who truly understood what was at stake. The secret that had begun with an overheard conversation had evolved into something much larger, a mission to preserve the monarchy itself during one of its most vulnerable moments. And James Patterson, a career security officer who had simply been doing his job, had become one of the key figures in that historic effort. 3 days had passed since James witnessed that private moment between King Charles and Queen Camilla. The conversation continued to echo in his mind, especially the mention of doctors and test results. He had tried to focus on his regular duties, but something felt different in the palace atmosphere. The change was subtle but noticeable to someone who had worked there as long as James had. Staff members spoke in hushed tones, and there seemed to be more private meetings than usual. The king's personal secretary had been making mysterious phone calls, and several medical professionals had visited the palace under the cover of routine checkups. On Thursday morning, James was assigned to accompany Queen Camilla to a private appointment outside the palace. The destination was listed simply as medical consultation on the official schedule, which was unusual. Normally, royal medical appointments were either held at the palace or at well-known hospitals with full security protocols. Instead, they traveled to a discreet medical facility in central London. The building was modern but unremarkable, the kind of place where wealthy individuals could receive treatment away from public attention. James noticed several other security personnel already in position as their car pulled up to the entrance. Queen Camilla seemed nervous during the journey, her hands fidgeting with her purse and her eyes distant. She barely acknowledged James's presence, which was unlike her usual friendly demeanor. As they approached the building, she turned to him with an expression that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "James," she said quietly, "what we're about to do here today must remain completely confidential, not just from the public, but from everyone in the palace as well. Can I trust you with that?" James met her gaze steadily. "Absolutely, Your Majesty. You have my word." She nodded, seeming to draw some comfort from his response. "Thank you. I know this puts you in a difficult position, but there are some things that must be handled with absolute discretion." They entered the building through a private entrance, avoiding the main lobby entirely. James was struck by how carefully orchestrated everything seemed. This wasn't a spontaneous appointment. It had been planned meticulously to ensure maximum privacy. Inside, they were greeted by a woman in her 50s wearing a professional but understated outfit. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Richardson, though she didn't specify her medical specialty. The way she spoke to Queen Camilla suggested they had met before. "Your Majesty," Dr. Richardson said warmly, "thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy, but I believe we have some answers for you today." Queen Camilla's face tensed at these words. "Is Charles already here?" she asked, looking around the reception area. "His Majesty arrived about 10 minutes ago," Dr. Richardson replied. "He's waiting in the consultation room. Shall we join him?" As they walked down a quiet hallway, James maintained his professional distance while staying alert to his surroundings. The facility was clearly designed for high-profile clients who valued privacy. There were no other patients visible, and the staff moved with the kind of discretion that suggested they were used to dealing with sensitive situations. Dr. Richardson led them to a conference room rather than a typical medical examination room. Inside, James could see King Charles sitting at a polished wooden table, his posture rigid with tension. Across from him sat another medical professional, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and graying hair. "James," Queen Camilla said, turning to him before entering the room, "please wait outside. No one else should be allowed access to this area while we're meeting." James positioned himself outside the door, his mind racing with questions about what kind of medical consultation required such extraordinary security measures. Through the partially soundproof door, he could hear the murmur of voices but couldn't make out specific words. About 20 minutes into the meeting, the voices inside the room grew louder. James found himself in the same position he had been in 3 days earlier, overhearing a conversation he wasn't meant to hear but unable to move from his assigned position. "How long?" he heard King Charles ask, his voice carrying clearly through the door. "It's difficult to say with certainty," came the reply from one of the doctors. "These things can progress slowly or rapidly. We're looking at anywhere from 6 months to several years." James felt his blood run cold. The fragments of conversation he was hearing painted a picture of a serious medical diagnosis, something with a timeline that was measured in months or years rather than weeks. And the public symptoms? Queen Camilla's voice was barely audible, but James caught every word. "When will people start to notice?" "That depends on several factors," Dr. Richardson replied. "Stress can accelerate the progression, and public appearances require a significant amount of energy and focus. We would recommend reducing the official schedule gradually." James heard the sound of chairs moving, and then King Charles's voice again, stronger this time. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "I will not abandon my duties because of this. There has to be another way." "Your Majesty," the male doctor interjected gently, "we understand your commitment to your role, but you must also consider your health and well-being. This condition will require careful management." "What about treatments?" Camilla asked. "Surely there's something that can slow the progression?" "There are options," Dr. Richardson replied. "Some experimental treatments show promise, but they would require regular hospital visits and could have significant side effects." James pressed himself closer to the wall, his heart pounding. The conversation was painting a picture of King Charles facing a serious medical condition, something that would progressively worsen and eventually affect his ability to perform his royal duties. "I need time to think," the king said after a long pause. "This is not just about me. This affects the entire institution of the monarchy." "Of course," Dr. Richardson replied. "We can schedule another appointment next week to discuss treatment options in more detail." James heard movement inside the room and quickly stepped back to his normal position. The door opened, and the two doctors emerged first, nodding politely to James as they passed. They were followed by King Charles and Queen Camilla, both looking pale and shaken. The king's usual composed demeanor had been replaced by something James had never seen before: genuine fear. Queen Camilla walked beside her husband, her hand resting protectively on his arm, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she had been fighting back tears. As they prepared to leave the building, King Charles suddenly stopped in the hallway. He turned to face James directly, his expression serious but filled with an unexpected vulnerability. "James," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I appreciate your service more than you can possibly imagine. The coming months may be challenging for all of us." James nodded respectfully. "I'm here for whatever you need, Your Majesty." The king studied his face for a moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. "There may come a time when I have to ask you to do things that go beyond your normal duties," he said. "Things that might conflict with standard protocol." "I understand, sir," James replied, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. Queen Camilla stepped forward then, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "What Charles is trying to say is that we may need your help in ways that aren't typically asked of security personnel. We may need you to help us maintain our privacy and dignity during a very difficult time." James felt the weight of their trust settling on his shoulders once again. "You can count on me," he said simply. The journey back to the palace was conducted in complete silence. James could see the royal couple in the rearview mirror, sitting close together but lost in their own thoughts. King Charles stared out the window at the passing London streets, while Queen Camilla held his hand tightly. When they arrived back at Buckingham Palace, James was surprised to see Prince William's car already parked in the courtyard. The presence of the heir to the throne suggested that this wasn't a coincidence. The family was being gathered for an important conversation. As James escorted the king and queen into the palace, he noticed several other family members arriving. Princess Anne pulled up just as they reached the entrance, followed shortly by Prince Edward. Whatever discussion was about to take place, it was clearly a family affair. King Charles paused at the entrance to the palace and turned back to James one more time. "Remember what we discussed," he said quietly. "Everything you've seen and heard today stays between us." "Absolutely, Your Majesty," James replied. As the royal family disappeared into the private quarters of the palace, James realized that he had become an unwitting participant in one of the most significant moments in recent royal history. The king was facing a serious medical condition, one that could potentially change the course of the monarchy. The implications were staggering. If King Charles's condition worsened, it could lead to abdication, regency, or other constitutional crises that the United Kingdom hadn't faced in decades. James understood now why the conversation 3 days earlier had carried such weight, why both the king and queen had seemed so burdened. Over the following hours, James maintained his regular duties while the royal family met in private. Staff members were notably absent from certain areas of the palace, and there was an unusual level of security around the family quarters. As evening approached, James found himself thinking about the conversation he had overheard at the medical facility. The doctors had mentioned timeline and progression, treatments, and side effects. Whatever King Charles was facing, it was serious enough to require the involvement of specialists and the gathering of the entire royal family. That night, as James completed his shift and prepared to leave the palace, he encountered Queen Camilla in one of the corridors. She was walking alone, which was unusual, and her face showed the strain of the day's events. "James," she said, stopping when she saw him, "I wanted to thank you personally for your discretion today. I know this puts you in a difficult position." "Not at all, Your Majesty," James replied. "I'm honored by your trust." She studied his face for a moment, seeming to come to some kind of decision. "There's something else you should know," she said quietly. "The coming weeks and months will likely bring changes to how things operate here. We may need to rely on you and a few other trusted staff members more than usual." James nodded, understanding that she was preparing him for increased responsibility and involvement in the royal family's private affairs. "Whatever you need," he said. Queen Camilla smiled sadly. "I hope we can count on that," she said, "because I suspect we're all going to need each other more than ever before." As James left the palace that evening, he carried with him the knowledge that the British royal family was facing its greatest challenge in generations. The king's health crisis would eventually become public knowledge. But, for now, James was one of only a handful of people who understood the true gravity of the situation. The weight of that secret, and the responsibility that came with it, would only grow in the days to come. James Patterson had served the British royal family for 15 years. His tall frame and sharp eyes made him perfect for close protection duty. He had seen many things during his time at Buckingham Palace, but nothing prepared him for what happened on that cold December morning. The royal household was buzzing with activity. Christmas preparations were underway, and King Charles was scheduled to meet with several government ministers. James was assigned to the king's personal security detail that day, a position he had held many times before. As the morning sun filtered through the palace windows, James took his position outside the king's private study. The hallway was quiet except for the distant sound of staff preparing for the day's events. He had been standing there for about 20 minutes when he heard voices approaching from the East Wing. King Charles appeared first, walking briskly down the corridor. He was dressed in his usual morning attire, a navy suit with a perfectly knotted tie. Behind him walked Queen Camilla, wearing an elegant cream-colored dress that rustled softly as she moved. James straightened his posture and nodded respectfully as they approached. What happened next would stay with James forever. As the royal couple reached the door to the study, King Charles suddenly stopped. He turned to face Camilla with an expression that James had never seen before. It was a mixture of frustration and something else that James couldn't quite identify. "We need to discuss this properly," the king said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but James could hear every word from his position just a few feet away. Camilla's face changed immediately. The warm smile she usually wore disappeared, replaced by a look of concern. She glanced around nervously, her eyes briefly meeting James's before looking away quickly. "Charles, not here," she replied, her voice carrying a note of urgency that made James's pulse quicken. "The walls have ears in this place." The king moved closer to his wife, and James found himself in an impossible position. His duty was to protect the royal family, but this meant he was witnessing something that felt deeply private. He considered stepping away, but his training told him to remain at his post. King Charles reached for Camilla's hand, holding it gently but firmly. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine," he said, his voice growing slightly louder. "The pressure is becoming unbearable." James felt his heart racing. In all his years of service, he had never heard the king speak with such raw emotion. The usually composed monarch seemed to be struggling with something significant. Camilla looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her husband's face. "I know it's difficult, but we have to think about the consequences," she said. "Think about what this could mean for the monarchy, for William, and the children." The mention of Prince William made James's stomach tighten. Whatever they were discussing, it involved the entire royal family. He tried to focus on his surroundings, scanning for any potential security threats, but his attention kept returning to the conversation unfolding before him. King Charles released Camilla's hand and began pacing in the small space outside the study door. His usual calm demeanor was nowhere to be seen. "I've been carrying this burden for months," he said, running his hand through his hair. "Every public appearance, every speech, every smile feels like a lie." Camilla stepped closer to him, placing her hand on his arm. "We knew this day might come," she said softly. "We talked about it before the coronation. Remember what we decided?" The king stopped pacing and looked directly into his wife's eyes. "I remember," he said, "but I didn't expect it to feel like this. I didn't expect the weight of it to be so crushing." James shifted slightly, trying to maintain his professional composure while processing what he was hearing. The king was clearly struggling with some kind of personal crisis, something that was affecting him deeply. "The doctors said the results would take time to process," Camilla continued, her voice barely audible now. "We can't make any decisions until we know for certain." The word doctors sent a chill through James. Was the king ill? Was that what this conversation was about? He had noticed that King Charles had seemed more tired lately, and there had been several private appointments that weren't on the official calendar. King Charles nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging slightly. "You're right, of course," he said. "But the waiting is the hardest part. Every morning I wake up wondering if today will be the day we get the call." Camilla moved to stand directly in front of her husband, taking both of his hands in hers. "Whatever the results show, we'll face it together," she said with conviction. "Just like we've faced everything else." The king looked into his wife's eyes for a long moment before pulling her into an embrace. James could see the tension in both their bodies, the way they held each other as if drawing strength from the contact. "I love you," King Charles whispered into Camilla's ear, but James heard every word. "I couldn't do this without you. And you'll never have to," Camilla replied, her voice thick with emotion. They held each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. When they separated, both had composed themselves somewhat, but James could still see the worry in their eyes. King Charles straightened his tie and cleared his throat. "We should go in," he said, gesturing toward the study door. "The ministers will be here soon." Camilla nodded, smoothing down her dress. "Remember, we agreed to wait until after the holidays," she said. "No matter what happens, we give the family one more normal Christmas." The king's jaw tightened at her words. "Normal," he repeated with a bitter laugh. "I'm not sure I remember what that feels like anymore." As they moved toward the door, James stepped forward to open it for them, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the turmoil in his mind. King Charles paused as he passed, looking directly at James for the first time that morning. "James," the king said, his voice carrying an unusual weight, "I trust one can count on your discretion regarding anything you might have overheard." James met the king's gaze steadily. "Of course, Your Majesty," he replied. "Always." The king nodded once, a look of gratitude flashing across his face before he entered the study with Camilla close behind. James closed the door and resumed his position, but his mind was racing with questions and concerns. Over the next few hours, as James maintained his post outside the study, he replayed the conversation in his mind countless times. The fragments he had heard painted a picture of a royal family in crisis, facing some kind of medical situation that could have far-reaching consequences. The meetings with the ministers proceeded as scheduled, but James noticed that both King Charles and Queen Camilla seemed distracted. Their usual warmth and engagement were replaced by a professional but distant demeanor that felt forced. As the day wore on, James found himself watching the royal couple more closely than usual. He noticed the way King Charles's hand trembled slightly when he reached for his tea, how Camilla's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and the meaningful glances they exchanged when they thought no one was looking. When the final meeting ended and the ministers had departed, King Charles and Camilla emerged from the study looking exhausted. They walked past James without acknowledging his presence, their whispered conversation too quiet for him to overhear. As James watched them disappear down the corridor, he realized that this moment had changed everything. He was no longer just a guard protecting the royal family from external threats. He had become a keeper of their most vulnerable secrets, a witness to their private struggles and fears. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders as he finally left his post for the day. Whatever was happening with King Charles and Queen Camilla, James knew that the coming weeks would test not only the royal family, but also his own loyalty and discretion. That evening, as James returned to his modest apartment outside London, he couldn't shake the image of the king's face from his mind. The usually confident monarch had looked almost fragile in that moment of vulnerability, and James realized that beneath the crown and the ceremony, the royal family was facing the same kinds of challenges that ordinary people dealt with every day. But, for them, the stakes were infinitely higher. Their personal struggles would inevitably become public knowledge, affecting not just their family, but the entire nation. James understood now why the king had looked so burdened, why every public appearance felt like a performance. As he prepared for bed that night, James made a silent promise to himself. Whatever was coming, whatever the royal family was facing, he would do everything in his power to protect them, not just from physical harm, but from the exposure and scrutiny that threatened to overwhelm them during what was clearly a very difficult time. The next morning would bring new challenges and revelations, but, for now, James held on to the trust that King Charles had placed in him. It was a responsibility he didn't take lightly, and one that would soon test every aspect of his loyalty and professional integrity.